Welcome, friend, the beautiful land of Kashmir, which once was called heaven on earth, and unfortunately, it has been an area of tragedies. So today we would like to hear from Dr. Mir, his story and his journey. How has it been? Welcome, Dr. Mir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Majid. I'd like to first thank you, and I'd like to also thank God Almighty for giving us the blessings. As you said, I was born and raised in Kashmir. Any Kashmiri would tell you that Kashmir is our life. It is the raison d'etre for a Kashmiri. In Uzbek language, they will call it Andijan. That is my life.
Wow.
And that's what Kashmir is for us. It's a relatively smaller place, not as small as many nations on earth, but we are a close-knit community which consists of not only Muslim Kashmiris, but Pandit Kashmiris who are Hindus. We also have Dogras from Jammu, we have Sikhs, we have Christians, we have Buddhists. Kashmir has prided itself for being a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual society. It was the most peaceful region of South Asia until 1947. My own life parallels, chronologically speaking, the travail of Kashmir through the 72 years long history of Indian occupation. I was born the same year when Kashmir was occupied by India. It truly has been a grueling uphill journey for at least for the last 4 generations, starting from my grandfather who was still alive, and my grandchildren are living through it too, who are here, but yet they see the emotional attachment we have with Kashmir.
Wow. So you were born in 1947?
Born in 47, yes.
What was the region where you were born, sir?
I was born in the northern district of Kupwara. It's a beautiful valley and some plateaus, and my village was on top of a plateau, and my mother's side came from the valley only 2 miles down southeast, and my wife comes from about 3 miles further away in another valley. It's also very beautiful. So Kashmir really is valleys within valleys, surrounded by Himalayas from all sides. I did my schooling first in my village, then my wife's town, and then I went to a larger town, and then I went to Sopore for college.
Got it.
It's a big apple town. And then I went to Srinagar for medical school and my internship and residency in surgery.
Nice.
As you know, Kashmir was nothing like I could have even imagined it when I opened my eyes, and it still is. It is still spectacular in spite of the tragedy of human suffering.
So how was it when you were
Yes.
back in school in Kupwara? How was it growing up? What kind of atmosphere was around you?
By and large, Kashmir was peaceful, but in 1947, my folks tell me that we had to escape our home and go into the woods. Woods were only about 300, 400 yards from my home, and then it went for dozens of miles further. And there was certain uncertainty, but in the first few years of my school, military camps were not too far from us, but they were not within the neighborhoods in which we lived.
And can I ask who was your family escaping from?
There was war between the Indian military that had come in, and on the other side was the Azad Kashmir, resistance to the Maharaja Hari Singh of Pakistan that were surrounding Kashmir, who were ancestrally related to us. So it wasn't uncommon for them to come, but the conflict was between Indian forces that had been landed in the Kashmir airport, and when Maharaja fled to India on Indian invitation,
So
and they made him sign what they think was its instrument of accession.
So this is the time of first war. The first war between. So in around October of 1947.
Yes, yeah, around there, yeah, in October, the Indian troops landed in Kashmir.
Okay, so and they were fleeing. So I think of one major confusion, particularly when I'm reading many of the Western or mixed sources on internet, the confusion, they put both Indian troops and Pakistani military both as aggressors against Kashmiri people in the land. So what did your parents tell you when they were taking shelter in 47?
They were escaping from Indian military. They were safe from the Azad Kashmir forces and the tribal people that had joined them to throw out not only they had already started fighting Azad Kashmir against Maharaja. He was fleeing. Okay. He really didn't have any moral authority to rule over us. He was a tyrant. His dynasty was tyrant. So they were running away, and Kashmiris had suffered hugely for approximately 100 years under their tyranny. Kashmiris had no love last for, they didn't even know India at that time.
Wow.
India invited itself. They controlled Maharaja's movements, and but Kashmiris would have been, happier being left alone.
As an independent state?
Yeah, well, that remains to be seen. That opportunity was never given to Kashmiris to go for an independent plebiscite. I think we would never know what our parents would have done. So I would not know what I would have done, but I would not have voted for India. That's for sure.
So one thing that I am shocked by on this misinformation, there's significant push from Indian side of narrative that it was Kashmiris who asked India to come save them from Pakistani invasion, while it wasn't Kashmiri people, it was only Maharaja, the Hindu Maharaja. But I think I would love to hear more directly from you, the will of Kashmiris back then.
Under the rules of division, which necessarily don't mean that they apply to people today, Kashmiris had the right to choose what state they want to belong. And Maharaja was a Hindu. He was hated. In 1931, there was a huge uprising against him, and then that morphed into a rebellion in Azad Kashmir from the militias there. So he was running away. Kashmiris didn't know India from Adam. No, it's an absolute lie on the part of the media, mostly promoted by Indians, and that Kashmiris would have wanted to be with India, and they would have wanted India to come and push Azad Kashmir forces. Azad Kashmiris and us are the same people in general, so they were fighting for us because in the valley, Sheikh Abdullah was fighting the political battle. On the Azad Kashmir side, it was Sardar Muhammad Ibrahim, who also was part of the Muslim conference. And they all were working together to throw the Maharaja out. And along comes India, unsolicited, without any appeal in the minds of Kashmiris.
Except
so that's how our parents
thought.
They were Indians coming to occupy us. And the Azad Kashmiris and the tribes men, they were trying to come, keep us free.
So, and I think India used Maharaja's signatures on the paper saying that Kashmir has acceded to India in October 47 when Pakistan had.
Sure. There was a well-known scholar, he has since passed away, Alistair Lamb. He was from Britain. He is one of the most reliable historians. In his book, he wrote a couple of volumes. He said there is no actual instrument of accession. Actually, Maharaja and Pakistan had signed a so-called standstill agreement that will hold off anything joining either India or Pakistan because there was so much turmoil in India and Pakistan at that time. And Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah's government had signed a standstill agreement. Indians did not sign a standstill agreement. Oh. That tells you their designs and their intent, their desire to have Kashmir occupied. They had Sheikh Abdullah, who was imprisoned by Maharaja. They had him released so that they could start negotiation with him. So they separately dealt with Sheikh Abdullah on one side. On the other side, they dealt with Maharaja Hari Singh, who had not made up his mind yet. He was fleeing under the pressure of the revolutionary movement from Azad Kashmir territory. So he actually then fled to Delhi.
Okay.
And they gave power to his 16-year-old son.
Wow.
Karan Singh.
He was 16 back then. I know
16
Karan Singh.
years old. 16 years old, yes. And what they did at that time is Maharaja wanted his wife to go back to Kashmir, to Jammu, so that she can take care of her son. But Indians manipulated such that his 16-year-old youngster gets the power. They did not allow his mother even to come from Birla House, where he was, not Birla House, it was in the, it is called the Imperial Hotel in Delhi. And they lodged him in the Imperial Hotel. They did not allow him or his wife to go back to Jammu.
Wow.
That was the winter capital of Jammu and Kashmir. And so he felt betrayed by Vallabhbhai Patel, who had given him guarantees of security, safety, and then finally they would not let him go. He died a death far away in Mumbai. So all that, the story they are weaving, the narrative they are giving is not based on facts.
So the whole start when they say that Kashmir had asked India's help. Kashmir had never asked India's help at that time.
No.
India had manipulated its way in to gain control of the region and then played those political games with Maharaja till by the time he found out he was
Maharaja on one side, Sheikh Abdullah on the other side, but there was no referendum. It was just they pick and choose whoever they want to. And they made deals with them unbeknown to Kashmiris, without actually asking what the will of the people was.
Got it. Probably by the time your earlier memories start as a toddler or as a young kid, you were already feeling. What was your feel while going to school? Did you feel as free citizen, or did you feel there was some threat?
The Indian forces were not as pervasive in small neighborhoods. But when you got about 4 or 5 miles from my village, you could see Indian camps. They were, they were all over Kashmir. But in my younger school years, all we knew that these are foreign forces. They are Indians.
Okay.
All I know is a kid would not go close to a camp without adult supervision. All we know that Kashmiri women would hide when Indian soldiers came to town to buy chicken and other things or look for laborers. Women would go inside the house.
Because of
that was the fear. Because of the fear of occupation forces. They are not your people.
So even though India says those forces were sent to protect, they were actually by locals were perceived as occupiers and
always occupiers. You could not 1,000 feet from you was too close for an Indian soldier to be close to you. But we had to live with it.
Wow.
But by the time I got to high school, the intensity got worse because they had by now taken all the political leaders of those who had been dealing with India, including Sheikh Abdullah and his party members in our area. They were all rounded up. They were in prisons.
Wow.
As they used these techniques, when your leaders are taken out, you really feel the burden of the occupation, and they are heroes of ours. Sometimes they made them our heroes only because they were fighting, we thought, for us. So Kashmiris knew that. But it is in college that I finally figured out. When I opened my eyes, I was only 16 years old or so. And we established a Students and Youth League that was a nationwide movement in Kashmir.
Where did you go to college?
That was in Sopore. I remember 1963 is when I went to college. And I joined the Students and Youth League and became an organizer as a teenager.
Got it. Okay.
And so we started working with the senior political leaders who we admired. And so I remember in college, we went on it was called NCC camp, in which there was some uprising. And, I remember speaking there against the Indian occupation. I was too young to have fully understood it, but the emotions were there.
Got it.
So that's how it was in my childhood.
So that's probably around
It was
19...
it was Youth League was a very popular movement of the youth, professors and college students that ran until 1970s.
1970. So now you were in college, you were seeing maybe some of the things were making more sense, and
Yes.
some of the politicians even that their interests were not aligning with what, like slogans versus the inside political games.
Yeah, we understood at that time, but Sheikh Abdullah was in prison starting in 1953.
Okay.
Because he had a deal with them, because they coerced him into joining India at that time. But he was strong enough and they knew the Kashmiri sentiment was so nationalistic at that time that they had to sign certain degree of internal autonomy document with Sheikh Abdullah. But as soon as the document a new constitution was made in Kashmir, Kashmir has its own prime minister according to that document. It was called Naya Kashmir, New Kashmir. Its own prime minister, its own president, its own legislature.
And that was from the beginning of
40s to 53. Okay. And in 53, when Sheikh Abdullah told India to make good on its promise to leave, Indians put him in prison.
Oh.
That is the beginning of the new political movement. And he stayed there until 1962-63.
In prison?
In prison, yes. Along with all his senior cadre. And they then started bringing these chief prime ministers, Bakshi Ghulam and others. And when he came out, he had a discussion, and they promised him in the prison, finally, you can go back to Kashmir, because they couldn't control Kashmir at that time also. But there was not that much militancy, or freedom fighters were not involved. People were just getting to colleges and schools and all that. We were getting on our feet, so to say, after the tyranny of the Maharajas. But in 1965, there was an uprising. I was, at that time, I had gone to medical school.
Okay.
I had moved from Sopore to Srinagar. And we had already been fighting pitch battles with the Indian CRPF forces in Sopore, pelting stones, and they would chase us with big lathis, and they would also, shoot. And that was happening throughout the valley of Kashmir.
Wow.
And that happened. And then 1960s, I was in medical school, but the political movement continued at some pace. But obviously, there was more and more military in more and more areas. Political leaders were getting very restive, and until 1980s, I left. 1974, I came to US.
So one question that for Sheikh Abdullah role seems very controversial, and I wanted to get a little clarification. So there's a far more complexity. It seemed like he didn't had his mind clear for a long time, and by the time he was thinking, he didn't have power. So what do you think?
I think you're right. Well, it's complex. None of the Indian leaders understood the consequences of what they were doing. Indians thought they would want to get more, but their destiny was pretty much visible. They had to take 50 states and club them together by compulsion, or whatever, promising everybody everything, but actually denying at the end everybody pretty much. Then that were these so-called princely states. Kashmir was one of them. But in Kashmir, I think they had a big appetite. I don't know whether that was for geostrategic purposes, or it was a political point of image for them to have a Muslim majority state, or a secularist liberal democracy as they saw it. But certainly Sheikh Abdullah was also not very sure, because he was coerced all along because of the two big powers, India on one side, obviously bigger, and supported by the British there, and Pakistan on the other. He probably wanted a separate Kashmir as is. I think he fell into the trap of India. And India thought they are getting a bargain in this by getting Sheikh Abdullah, because he is a popular leader.
Right.
And any opposition to him was from Maulvi Muhammad Yusuf Shah, who was one of the leaders of the original Muslim conference in Kashmir, in which Sheikh Abdullah was a member too. But he had to flee occupied Kashmir to go to Azad Kashmir, where he became the president of Free Kashmir.
Okay.
Sheikh Abdullah, on the other hand, had a younger mind. He probably wished well for Kashmiris, but I think he fell into the trap of bigger powers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that he meant to do Kashmiris harm,
right.
But he ended up doing us harm.
Right, because of his naivety, or maybe
yes.
Some people say because he wanted to be the prime minister.
Yeah. And he had spent time in prisons, and he comes from a landlocked state. Indians were playing big games. Pakistanis were playing big games. Kashmiris were caught as a byproduct of the Indo-Pakistani division. And I think with that, he sacrificed Kashmir.
Wow.
But without meaning to do so.
Without knowing what he's doing, right?
Even after these years of knowing the aftermath of what happened, I don't believe that he initially was dishonest. He was sincere, but he didn't have the moral standards in his personality, in his character.
And maybe
his mind was thinking something
foresight.
else. It was the deficiency of character that made him submit to India at different places.
Mm-hmm.
They fooled him several times, not just once. But when he came back out of prison in 60s, they fooled him again.
Wow.
And he joined the Indian government. Now, this time, not as prime minister, co-equal to Pakistani prime minister and Indian prime minister. He had to end up compromising and became simply a chief minister by then, because they had changed the constitution of Kashmir by then.
So now, what happened in '65? And probably you were probably in college or medical school back then.
I had just joined medical college, and then the college got closed soon after because it became a law and order situation.
So the war, Pakistan-India war, was going on back then.
There was a good number of intellectuals that had joined the freedom movement at that time, who were willing to go for armed resistance to Indian occupation.
So this freedom movement, which was named militants.
It was intellectuals, but they were thinking of a armed revolution. Yeah, armed rebellion. That is what it was, and many of them ended up in prisons and tortured, and then they finally were let go once they controlled the uprising. So that's the internal story. I won't talk about Pakistan-India war. That was not directly relevant to us, but although it was fought because of Kashmir, we were not directly a part of it.
So at that time, they would be called more freedom fighter. They were trying to get their land back from oppression.
Yes, that is exactly right. They did not want to have anything to do with India.
And it seems conflict was still allowing regular life things to continue, while knowing there's an occupied military sitting on the neck. People were still working, doing things.
Yes, you have to live life. Not everybody can go on the roadside and confront a brutal army, about 250, 300,000, and have themselves, it will be a suicide mission.
And there were also, seems like there was no consensus for a long time what people should do. There were people who always, in the beginning, there was a significant proportion wanted to join Pakistan. There was a significant proportion wanted to be independent, left alone as independent state. Of course, none wanted to join India, but these two were the major options.
Yes. It was in our blood. It was in our DNA by the time I went to college that we don't want to be with India. I mean, that should have been known to Indians, to Nehru and others.
And that's why they were not doing referendum.
There's some common sense. Indians had not had any referendum to decide that British should leave, not Pakistanis. It was a process, and that process culminated in the British leaving. Kashmir had started a process also, but the ultimate will of the people in quantitative and qualitative manner was never ascertained, because we never were given that one vote per person to go to the polls unfettered, uncoerced, and go and decide what you want.
Right.
That's what Indian states got to do, Pakistani states got to do, but Kashmiris did not.
Right. Which is United Nations had passed that resolution.
And that is, I know what, the United Nations Security Council resolutions, on April 21st, 1948, that said Pakistan should withdraw their forces. Indians should decrease the forces to the point, and they were allowed only to have almost a police force kind of thing in Kashmir, not an occupation force. So that there would be, because they are in charge, somebody has to be in charge of a state. You cannot have chaos, anarchy. That was the only mission they were given by the United States, or indirectly given, that keep control over that, so that there's peace. Every society needs policing, but that was not supposed to be an occupation.
Right.
India used that permission to create an occupation. The more they stayed there, the more they got. This is probably was in their thinking all along, but to us that was not acceptable. With regard to the Kashmiris, it has changed, but not substantially. The wave of sentiment. We will never know what Kashmiris will do today, or could have done 70 years ago, or will do whenever the time comes, 10, 5 years from now. We can't tell that.
A referendum?
By a referendum, but that's all Kashmiris are asking for.
But they are also changing the demographic.
Well, we know that was until now.
Right.
That was not understood probably by the previous Indian leaders, except in 1947. The Hindutva was a factor all along Indian politics, and I've studied, pretty, thoroughly. Hindutva. Savarkar, when he gave the word in 1926, I think it was, they were all along a problem for Indian National Congress. But Indian National Congress did not have the will, the courage, or the understanding of controlling that internal enemy that was going to destroy India at some point. That's why they went after Mahatma Gandhi. They got rid of him. But Indian National Congress allowed these Hindu Mahasabha leadership to come into the government up until this time, 1914, when they gained enough strength. It was a snake, on their, in their midst, and ultimately it has swallowed the Indian National Congress. All that, secular democracy, that's pretty much a thing of the past right now. But in Kashmir, I think the thinking right now is, let Kashmiris decide. You don't have to have any propaganda about it. If your narrative is correct, it'll show up. If our narrative is correct, it will show the guns.
To the atrocities.
So far, according to the most credible international human rights agencies, the data is that over 100,000 people have been killed since 1990. Between 89 and 90, that's when it started in earnest. There are 6,000 people who have disappeared, and they are in mass graves.
6,000?
6,000. They have been made to disappear.
And that was when?
Since 1990.
Since 1990.
1990. And this is also by Amnesty International and every Asia Watch and others. They all know it. And United Nations Human Rights Council knows it. In these 30 years, everybody, I'm just not exaggerating it, almost everybody has been either personally touched within their family or have had multiple family members killed or lost a friend or friends. Nearly every Kashmiri living or visiting Kashmir, living in or visiting Kashmir to see their family, has encountered humiliation and indignity at the hands of the Indian forces. Local police sometimes does it, but it's mostly Indians. It happens at the military checkpoints when you are going to your home or going to marketplace. It can happen on the roadside. It can happen inside your own home. I don't want to speak about my family because there are too many that have died. and it's very close family members.
Right.
There is no sacred space left in Kashmir for Kashmiris.
Wow.
There is no sacred space.
And
back when I was younger, they were in military camps, but now they are in your localities, on the streets, everywhere. At least 900,000, maybe 1 million soldiers.
wow.
And I can tell, and what that does is just basically people are unarmed, they're civilians, they take pre-teen boys, they take girls. There are people in prisons, women. Asia Andrabi is one of the ones. Her husband and her, they've been in prison for years and years. Their son is now, I think, 19 or 21 years old. Had a dinner with his mom and dad. And his mom and dad have never picked up a gun. These are political leaders. The ratio of military or armed forces to civilians is 1:8.
Because it's
Within the
about 8
valley
million
where they're
people.
controlling, there are 8 million people living within the valley, which has been surrounded, which is under siege. And there are about 1 million people, Indian security forces. And so you can see the scale of the atrocities that they must be perpetrating.
One major event where last year's August 5th, taking away 370, Article 370. So how has they say from their narrative, things have gotten better. We know that is not true. So I wanted to hear your perspective, what happened from August 5th of last.
One is our own personal experience and the anecdotes. And we talked to our families, even though there is no 4G there, it's only 2G. Since last year, pretty much all schools have been closed for 1 full year.
Wow.
That is preceding COVID, since August 5th last year. For months, there was not even 2G. Internet was completely snapped.
Okay.
We could not, for the first few weeks, talk to our family. Even on the landlines were snapped. There was no WhatsApp. There were no phone lines that were working. Kashmir was almost in abyss at the time for us.
Nobody allowed to go from outside, no communication
You could not
from
go,
inside.
yes, you could not go in, you could not come out at that time. Whenever anybody speaks, you are picked up. You write a post, or you write an article, you will go to prison.
Wow. Fear.
Not only in Kashmir, but even those journalists that are inside India, they dare not write anything that's directly critical of India.
And international media is not allowed to go in.
International media are not allowed to go in. The American Red Cross is not allowed to go in. No human rights agencies from outside can go in. People are locked inside. It's a martial law, a curfew, pretty much all the time. And since the COVID came, it has gotten even worse. That has given India an excuse to shut people inside. In the hospitals, many of the people that go to hospitals, I just spoke with somebody this morning, about a couple hours ago. He said people don't want to go to the hospitals. Number one, they lock their families away in some concentration camp. Number two, about everybody after age 60, 70 really never gets out of there.
Really?
Yeah, there is one, I think, ventilator for 70, it was 70,000 people or something. There are no ventilators. There are no PPEs. Testing is sloppy. People are under tremendous strain.
They're left to die, or
They are left to die, and most people just keep them at home. In Kashmir, population is not very dense, and Kashmir had a chance to survive through education and through providing PPEs and others and having more doctors. With regard to the punishment Kashmiris are getting, it is because they want to punish Kashmiris. India is using it as a tool, as a cover, so that they can tell Kashmiris how tough they can be.
Wow.
All the Kashmiri prisoners that are in prisons across India and in Kashmir, none of them really, the true leaders of Kashmir has been released. There were about 13,000 that were rounded up on August 5th, within the few days before that and after that. Many have been released, but the most revered leaders are still in prisons. Sayyid Ali Gilani is 93 years old. He is the most popular leader, the most revered leader. He spent about 40 years of his life in prisons, and now he's been in house arrest for 11 years, going on 12th. Muhammad Yasin Malik is in Tihar jail. He's been there prior to the August 5th. He's one of he's the second most popular leader.
Wow.
Shabir Shah has been there for decades. I've talked to him once on the phone, but I never actually physically seen him. There is one of the most popular Kashmiri attorneys is called Mia Abdul Qayyum. He has been president of Bar Association of Kashmir multiple times. He has diabetes, heart disease. He's in Tihar jail in India. Asya Andarabi she is also in prison in India. They fill prisons so fast that there's not enough space in prisons in Kashmir.
Wow.
So the life is tough. And, when you try to decapitate political leadership, people are frustrated, and they have to do something, to keep their sanity. So the last 30 years have been terrible, and the last 1 year has been horrible for Kashmiris.
Right. So is there any solution? What's the hope? What could happen that would change these situations?
Well, number one, international community cannot but act at some point at the level of United Nations. We know United Nations Security Council Secretary General has said more than once now that Kashmir dispute has to be settled according to the wishes of the people of Kashmir, according to the UN resolutions. European Union has supported Kashmir's right to self-determination. Pakistan has agreed with that repeatedly. Only country that does not allow it is India. So the world powers have to put pressure on India. Either it is that or this conflict between Kashmiris and Indians, and Kashmiris, Indians and Pakistanis is going to turn into a nuclear flashpoint. There's no escaping it. China is into the game now. China will not tolerate India's continued occupation of Kashmir because they are threatening it just like they are threatening Nepal and others. India is not as powerful morally right now. They had a semblance of democracy and it was the largest democracy, even though the poorest. But now India is in the clutches of RSS and Hindutva. It's not really BJP that's ruling it. It is RSS that's ruling it. RSS is not going to let them, undo CAA in India and let Kashmir go. But that's the dilemma that India has to figure out on its own. If it continues to keep Kashmir under control, India will probably start disintegrating from within. And then it may have trouble without. Kashmiris have no choice. They can't live with India, but India won't let us go. A sustained political struggle in Kashmir and the support from other countries needs to come. We have enough Kashmiri diaspora. We are rallying, people around. We are using social media. And we are, asking Pakistan and Turkey and Malaysia and Indonesia and OIC and countries in Africa and South and Central America to come to our support. You cannot live as a nation, no matter how powerful you are, in isolation. Mm-hmm. India will have to face the consequences of the occupation and atrocities. Too much is too much sometimes. You can go only so far, and then humanity comes to rally to the cause of the oppressed people. And we believe that that's going to happen someday. And But there is no way Kashmiris will, how and what shape this resistance is going to take, India will determine it. I think Nelson Mandela has said it also. They will set they'll set the tone of Kashmiri movement. It's not up to Kashmiris to decide whether they want to go with peaceful resistance and rallies and protests and other things, or would they, create more trouble. That is, I think, up to India. If they de-escalate, Kashmiris will be so much more comfortable with their resistance, but they are pushing the youth to the edge. And I think then it is hard to control them, because an individual is an individual. It doesn't matter what you confront him with. They are going to take lessons based on their life experience dealing with Indian soldiers and the political oppression, humanitarian oppression. I think they are going to I don't see in my lifetime or in the long term future or near future, Kashmiris really buckling and submitting.
Very insightful, particularly firsthand from your experiences. And do you feel interfaith connection with Hindus could help?
We did some here, absolutely, and that needs to be done regardless of whether they support us or not. I think 2 years ago, were invited by this other South Indian group called Tamils, from the South, and they invited Muslims for an iftar dinner at a public place, and they cooked, they did everything. Obviously, I think many Indians are people like us who have a faith, and they have a heart, they have a head. I'm sure they are uncomfortable in what's going on. It's hurtful to them. I believe right from the beginning in my childhood that Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims belong together in many places. And then we come to here, and Jews and Christians, where we had a Muslim-Jewish dialogue for the last 5 years here in Akron, Ohio. You can't tell a Jewish person from a Muslim person, and when they speak to each other, they talk for each other.
Nice.
They speak, and so I think that's how the Christians are doing. They have joined us. We have a tri-faith dialogue. We do need help, and we do need to understand each other. And it should never be a zero-sum game. There should be always something for the other in what you do.
Thank you, sir. This has been, I learned a lot, and I clarified a lot of confusions that I had felt. And I'm hoping that people on these Wikipedia pages and all those other resources where a very false narrative has been published gets corrected, and we spread more true information. And I think even more Hindus and Indians get to know the truth, they would confront their government, and hopefully we see Kashmiris and everybody feel equal, feel free, and exercise livelihood and resume back to normal. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mir. And
thank you so much.
We'll look forward to learning more from you.
Thank you so much for reaching out through Adnan, and tell him I said salams.